Hello, writers. I am so happy to have Samantha Skal with me here today. Hi, Sam.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Sarah. I'm so excited to be here.
Absolutely. I know Samantha does all these great things within the writing world, but writers, if this is your first time meeting Samantha, let me just tell you a bit about her. She is a fan of the scary, the mysterious, and suspenseful, and she is the executive director of ThrillerFest, the co-founder of Shadows and Secrets Writing Retreats, which is specifically focused on thriller mysteries, correct?
Yes, exactly.
Awesome. And she is an Author Accelerator certified book coach who specializes in coaching mystery, thriller, and suspense authors from novel planning all the way through the delightful hell that is revision. Her superpower as a coach is brainstorming twists without ground up rewrites, and she is an enthusiast of homemade sourdough bread and cheese of all kinds. Sam writes stories that keep her up at night and lives in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. And Sam, thanks again for joining us. And writers, if you haven't figured it out, Samantha's here with us to talk about scary stuff and twisty
Hmm.
stuff and all the things that I tend to shy away from because I am a lightweight when it comes to the scary, but I do enjoy a good twist.
Yes.
Maybe let's get right to it here with twists because whenever someone is talking about crafting twists, I'm like, you need to go find Samantha Skal because
Thank you.
she is the queen of the twist. I just want to make sure that we're setting maybe some equal footing here for
Yeah.
writers who might not be aware exactly of what we're talking about. But what do you think constitutes a twist when we're talking about, books, writing? What are we calling a twist?
Sure. So in mystery, thriller, and suspense, it's the villain's journey that is really what we're dealing with, and the reveal of what actually they're doing. That's the twist. If you're talking about not MTS, mystery, thriller, suspense, then it's just the antagonist, right? So it's twisty because it's unexpected to the protagonist, who's the one receiving the story and like bopping along. And then every time one of those truths kind of pops up, or that they have to face it and they understand what's actually happening, that is a twist. So a twist, to define it fully, is a reveal of what's actually going on behind the scenes of the story.
I
And
love that.
yeah, opposite sides of story, protagonist, antagonist. This is how we end up having it be really fun and oftentimes scary if you're talking about MTS.
Yeah, yeah. So the twist, I love how you're talking about um it happening sort of behind the scenes, or at least to the
Mhm.
protagonist's point of view, like not really within their realm of knowledge yet, but
Yes.
it's intentional. It's when you're talking about twist, you're not talking about, and then there was this random strike of lightning. Like that's not our twist that we're aiming for, correct?
No, no. I try to avoid coincidences at all costs in MTS particularly. I think you maybe get one, maybe, but I would be very cautious of that just because readers expect and really like to have everything be sort of brought back together and neatly fit together, right? Think of it like a
Right.
puzzle, or a 3D puzzle is the best way of describing it. And we want there to be reasons that everything is there. We don't want anything to be random, because that's a little less satisfying than if the author has done all this work to create this wonderful world that's very unexpected and twisty to the reader and the protagonist. And tying it all together in the end is one of the most satisfying things that I think one can do as an author and a
Yeah.
reader.
Well, and there's something about like that underlying stuff that's happening that establishes the antagonist as being someone that's a worthy antagonist. If there's
Yes.
like this thought that's going behind it, and it's not just like this chaos of evil.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, that can work. There are stories we can all think of where somebody's done that
Sure.
successfully. But in general, the more intentional, and then the better you know your antagonist or your villain, the more satisfying they're going to come across to the reader
Yeah.
and the protagonist. It's like, as you just said, a worthy adversary. We don't read books because we want to just see one side of things. We want to see both sides. We want to sort of question why people are doing what they're doing. And if your villain has a very good reason for doing what they're doing, that's interesting, right? Because thrillers and mysteries and suspense are all about the exploration of how can somebody make a series of bad choices and how far can it go? And what would you, the reader, if you're in this position, which hopefully you'll never be in, because again, we don't want these things to actually happen, how would you react in that situation? Those are the kinds of questions we want to bring up in the reader's mind. So, interesting villains are the ones that actually have some oomph behind them, and we know why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's wonderful. Well, it's wonderful reading, maybe not wonderful for the for the
Can get a little dark.
protagonist. So when you are working with writers, because you have worked with lots of mysteries and thrillers and suspense, what are the types of things that you like to encourage with your writers? Like, are there some ground rules that you have for making either a good twist or a satisfying twist, if that's something that's not currently present in their work?
Yeah, so I would say the number one thing I see is that writers have not thought through who their villain is. You know,
Mm.
sometimes, and I made this mistake when I first started writing in this space too, so no judgment. But you know, when we enter writing for the first time, particularly with beginning novelists, our inclination is just to follow what the protagonist's journey is, right? And that's the story. That's the entire story. That's what your goal is. What we're missing is what's underneath the surface of the story, and that's what the villain or the antagonist is doing. And so at a certain point, you know, whether you're a discovery writer or, you know, you like to pants the whole thing and then go back, or you're a plotter, I myself fall somewhere in between. I like to call myself a plantster. I discovery write until I have to have boundaries, and then I figure out what's actually going on and I figure out my benchmarks. But the very first step is understanding who your villain is and why they're doing what they're doing. And, you know, I like to ask people, like, what was your villain doing on the day the protagonist came in and ruined everything? Right? Because oftentimes that's the start of your story. Is like, you know, if it's a MTS story, you may have a dead body on page one. You may not, you may have something else scary that happens, but that's the start of the journey of how these two people are going against each other. And, you know, because it's MTS, the protagonist is usually going to win. They're the one we're rooting for, but we're there for the journey. We're there to see how it plays out. And then only after that can we start to figure out these other genre expectations, like multiple twists. There's always going to be one at 50%. The midpoint turn is another way of saying that. That's
Yeah.
classic across all stories, right? Your climactic twist, again, that's just the climactic moment where your protagonist faces the story question and solves it. And then unique to MTS is this 98% kind of final twist, which is something that's new. This may well be the actual villain that's behind everything. Like maybe the person that the protagonist conquered in the climax is someone they hired or someone they framed or something. That's where you start to get really fun in this particular space that doesn't show up often in, you know, more contemporary or whatever else.
Yeah, where all the pieces fall into place. I
Yes,
don't read as widely in this space, but I have seen plenty of films that would satisfy, where all of a sudden I'm thinking, of course, of the Usual Suspects, where all of a sudden it's
absolutely.
like, oh,
Yes, yes. And how fun is that, right? I mean, The Sixth Sense
right.
is another
Yes,
classic one where
absolutely.
you know, there are some people I've talked to recently who saw it coming, and I'm so impressed with that. I was not one of them. I
Yeah.
was just as shocked as everybody else. But, you know, those clues were there throughout the entire story. We just didn't know to look for them because we were being misdirected by the POV of the protagonist.
Yep. Yep. So that actually leads me to a next question that I did want to ask, was you're
Yeah,
talking about this perspective, because as writers are working through their story, are you encouraging them to mislead the reader in order for this twist to seem even twistier?
absolutely. So the best way to do that is interiority. I like to tell people, you know, have this kind of constant inner monologue for your protagonist, asking scary questions like, what if I walk into the woods right now? Is there someone hiding behind that tree? Is there going to be a bear around that next corner? Am I walking myself into a trap where someone's going to try to hurt me? Am I doing the right thing? What am I missing? You know, all these kinds of things can increase suspense for your reader and also misdirect the reader and the
Yeah.
protagonist because of maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But there's going to be a logical explanation for why they're thinking this. So, you know, to get a little scary, like if you're talking about the woods example, let's say that someone thinks that someone is following them and they found like, I don't know, a jacket outside their house that doesn't belong to them. So then when they go on their daily walk through the woods, they're wondering if someone's going to jump out at them. Your actual villain may well have looked at the person who dropped the jacket and thinks like, wow, that was a silly move because now this person thinks that someone's following them, but I'm not the one who's actually following them. I'm over here watching from up in the tree or whatever it is.
Right.
So your actual truth can be very different from what the protagonist thinks is the truth, and that is misdirection. That's how you get red herrings, the jacket in this example.
Yep.
Um, and it's great fun, but if you don't know what's actually going on with your villain and your protagonist before you start doing this, it gets very confusing very quickly. And so I always focus on that first, and then we build out.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I do think at some point, you mentioned the plotting and the pantsing, and I do think at some point it would make sense that a little bit of planning has to be happening
It does.
before
Yeah.
we're like diving in 100%.
Yeah, I give myself and my people somewhere between 5 to 10,000 words of discovery writing just to figure out what you want to write about when
Mhm.
you're first starting out.
Yeah.
For me, that's often a scene, or I'll picture something that's oftentimes scary because again, this is the space I write in, and I'll write it from several different POVs and figure out what resonates the most with me. And then once I kind of start thinking like, ooh, this is the fun one. I force myself and my clients to back off from that, and then we start planning and we figure out bumpers, using the inside outline,
Mhm.
using story spines, and figure out where this story is going to go, what the villain is doing first, because again, the protagonist's whole journey in MTS is to experience what the villain is actually doing. So it's really about what the villain is doing, and your protagonist is the person receiving it, translating it, experiencing it, solving it. And so if you don't know what's actually happening, then your story can oftentimes break down. That is not to
Yeah.
say that you can't fix it once you've already written or you get stuck or something, because oftentimes the backs of our brains, particularly if you read in this space, have already sort of thought of this. And so unexpected villains can and do happen, particularly if you're stuck in the climactic scene. Like this happened to me with my first book. I was writing along and I got to the point where I thought my person was going to face off the person doing the bad things. And it turns out that that person was not the bad person at all. It was this other person over here. And that can be really fun. It just takes a little bit of work to figure out how to get it to make sense in retrospect.
Yeah. No, I love that. It's such a fascinating group of genres, really, like this clump of genres, because
Yeah,
you you are experiencing, as you have said, the villain's story, and yet the villain may or may not appear on screen very
absolutely. Yeah.
often.
I
And so
mean,
that's what's so
yeah.
fascinating about it.
Yes, and it's something that's so overlooked, I think, when, there's so much great writing advice out there about how to write a good mystery. And, much of it I agree with. But I do think that the villain is one of the most overlooked pieces of that. And it takes a little bit of effort up front. And then to your point, we don't really see them until we face them in the climax or the final twist scene. And but you're gonna have these like truths that pop
Yeah,
up through the story that you have to deal with as a protagonist, because twists are unsatisfying when the reader has no chance of figuring out that this could have happened this way. Readers are clever. They're constantly looking for little clues that you, the author, have planted that the reader knows they're being misdirected away from using the protagonist. And if we've done our author job well, our readers will go through with the protagonist and think like, totally it's this, or, the protagonist isn't thinking this, but it's definitely this person over here. And then when it actually gets revealed, we look back and we're like, it was there the whole time, like this clue and this clue, but it totally got misinterpreted. And I'm so satisfied because I had a chance to figure it out. If those villain truths are not there, we have no way of figuring it out. And that's when
right.
people throw the book against the wall and are like, no, I'm never reading you again because you never gave me a shot, right? This is part
Right.
of the reason we read it is puzzle solving. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also so interesting that you get to the end and you realize what it was,
yes,
whether or not it was what you thought it was going to be. But then it can make you inclined to like, okay, I got to start over and like see it play
totally.
out now with a
Yeah.
new lens and the new information. Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely done that a handful of times where I'm like, this definitely wasn't stated this way. And I would have picked up on it, and I go back and I'm like, my gosh, they totally nailed it. Like it was there the whole time. And I just didn't remember because they did such a good job misdirecting my attention.
Right, right. So you've got the clever catchphrase of writers stuck in revision hell.
Yes.
And so what is it about the Miller mystery, thriller, suspense categories that you think is particularly challenging for writers? I mean, I think every genre has its good stuff and
Absolutely.
its stuff that makes it so difficult. There's no easy or more difficult genre to write.
Yes.
But what is it about this MTS category that you think puts writers through revision hell more than others?
Yeah, well, it's when you have to explain it all, right? So it's
Yeah.
when usually, I mean, most often I get people in this revision hell space when they get to their climactic scene and they have to explain, like they have that face-off scene with the villain, and the villain explains why they've been doing what they've been doing or what they've been doing or the point of what they've been doing or whatever, right? Their motivation has to be there, but there is no motivation. And so all of a sudden it falls flat. It feels kind of not exciting. It's like you feel the suspense come out of like a balloon losing its air, you know, it just, the story just loses oomph because without that, you know, it just doesn't feel good. You can tell when you write it and it gets really frustrating really quickly. And so people will come to me and they'll have a great setup, right? We have like a really cool crime and, you know, a probably spunky protagonist who's trying to solve it. And they've gone on all these twists and turns throughout the story to get there. But because we don't understand the villain, the writer and me, don't understand the villain yet, we lose that oomph. And so the coaching through that is basically just going back to the villain and figuring out like, who is this person? Why do they want to do what they're doing? Why didn't they take every single easy out they had, which usually is just like walking away, right? You know, why did they keep going when the police were chasing them, when, you know, I don't know, the protagonist was chasing them, when whatever. There's always a good reason for them to stop doing it unless they have a driving reason, just like your protagonist, to push them through the story. So
Yeah.
that's a rough spot to be in. I have been there myself. I know what it feels like. It is very hellish, which is why I named that Revision Hell. But I have yet to meet a story where we haven't been able to figure out some other character or something that just we add in a little bit and all of a sudden it unlocks it and your villain becomes this, you know, 3D, like deep, motivated character that's really interesting. And then we have our finish line, you know, out to the end of the story.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really astute because I do think that that big reveal moment, perhaps more than other genres. I mean, the climax and whatnot of any book is important, but I
Of
feel
course.
like especially for the genres that you're talking about, because it makes or breaks the entire story. You know, like romance, I might
Yeah.
have this great climactic moment, but maybe the couple could have gotten together another way, or, you know, like there
Yeah.
might have been other solutions and still that would still have given us a satisfying finish. But for the MTS,
Yeah.
it's like it's
Well,
everything. If you've got something, it's like a belly flop. If
totally. That's a
yeah,
great way of saying
yeah,
it. Yeah. I mean, the suspense and the we read MTS readers read MTS. I won't include everyone in that. Because we want to be scared. We want to be held. We want the story to suck us in and not let us go in a way that's sort of uncomfortable, right? We're there to be a little bit scared, to be a little bit nervous. And we want to have it just increase in suspense all the way through. And the climactic scene actually is sort of just a little dip, and then it keeps increasing until the very end. So the air doesn't go out of the balloon until like the last page of the book. Whereas in romance, the air goes out of the balloon when they decide to get together.
right,
And that's why we read romances. We know they're going to get together. We're there to figure out
right,
how. In MTS, we know that our good guys are going to conquer our bad guys. We're there to figure out how, but we don't want to be let down. It's just a steady
yeah,
upward tension ratcheting, you know, so it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse until it gets resolved at the very, very end. But without motivation, you know, that can be, it can fall flat.
yeah, yeah. So I know that twists are used in other genres as well. I mean, everything can have a twist.
Yeah.
Even in picture books, we talk about having a twist
Oh,
at the end.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so I don't know, are there ways that writers of other genres might
hmm
benefit from learning about twists, you know, given this perspective that we've been
Yeah,
talking about?
absolutely. So just it's all about motivation. So let's take I don't know, let's take a kid's book, for example, where you have like, you know, kiddo and say a goose. And the kiddo's going to make a bunch of assumptions about what the goose wants. And the goose, whether or not they're talking, is going to have some assumptions about what the kid wants. And oftentimes those can be wrong. And so the reveal of what the true motivation is, that's your twist because it's unexpected because your kiddo who's telling the story is going to be bopping along and thinking like the goose definitely wants to be my friend or doesn't want to be, let's say doesn't want to be my friend, right? The goose is a little bit scared or something, or keeps like trying to go over to this little pond over here. And the kid is sad because the goose seems to not want to hang out. But actually the goose does want to hang out. They just can't go over to this pond over here because reasons, capital R.
Yep.
And when all that gets revealed, that's your twist. And so just think about how you can have your protagonist make logical assumptions based on their own filters And it needs to be logical. That's a really key point. We don't want our protagonist to be like, I definitely think someone's after me, but I have no reason to think that, right? That's not very
Right,
satisfying. But if they have a reason to think it, it may not be the right reason to think it,
right.
but the assumption of motivation is how you build a twist in any story. And this is works in romance too, right? It's like I
Yep.
assume, depending on your trope and where you start, like the assumption is either that they don't want to be with or they do want to be with, and how do you, the protagonist, feel about that? How do we get to the end of the story with those assumptions in place? And then the reveal of the other person's assumptions is what makes it twisty.
Yeah, that's really succinctly and well said.
Thank you.
So now writers will know exactly why I say Sam is the person to talk to about all things related to twists. Yeah, that's really, really well said. So Samantha, I want to be able to
Yes.
make sure that writers can find you if they're writing in these categories and they want to learn more about your retreats and all the things. So where can the writers go to learn more about you and your work and your writing and all that?
Oh, thanks so much. So the easiest place is just samanthaskal.com. That's Samantha, just like it sounds, and then Skal. And I have links there to both the retreat, which is called Shadows and Secrets Writing Retreats. That's the website for that if you're curious, but there's a link on my website. And I also have a little product, a little mini course, excuse me, called Find Your Final Twist, which kind of leads you through this concept of figuring out your villain and figuring out how they might fit into a final twist, which can be applied in all genres. Again, it's just motivation, uh, revelation.
Yep.
And that's a really fun little course that I put together, and I really enjoy it, and I hope you will too.
That is awesome. Samantha, I just want to thank you again for your time for this fabulous conversation.
Thank you. This is so fun. I love talking about this stuff.
All right, writers, thank you so much for joining us, and we will catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.